The chamber was big enough to swallow a small city whole. It had been built that way on purpose. When every spacefaring species in the galaxy sits in the same room, the room should remind them how small they are. The architects had understood this. They had done their job well. It worked, mostly. Ambassador Srel Vaughn had been sitting in this chamber for 400 years. She still felt it, that low pressing weight of the ceiling, the curved walls that bent sound in strange ways, the light that came from no clear source and landed on everything with equal coldness. She had stopped caring about it 2 centuries ago. Now it just annoyed her. She settled into her seat and ran one thin limb across the surface of her desk. The session marker above her glowed soft blue. Session 4000. A round number. The kind that made younger delegates feel like they were part of something important and historic. Srel Vaughn had been at session 3002, and 2000 before that. Round numbers meant nothing. The problems were always the same problems wearing different clothes. She watched the chamber fill. 47 species represented today. Some arrived in breathing suits. Some sat in sealed water tanks and communicated through surface speakers. One delegation sent only a projection of light, because the actual beings could not survive open atmosphere. The conclave had rules for all of this. It had rules for everything. That was the one thing she had always respected about this place. The rules were real, and they held, even when the people using them did not deserve them. She liked that about it. Most days. Today was not most days. She felt the shift before she saw it. Something in the room. The way the newer delegates, the ones less than 200 years into their seats, were sitting forward. Alert. Invested. Their eyes moving between their data screens and the main floor, with the energy of people who believed they were about to witness something important. Srel Vaughn's chromatophores pulsed once. Deep gray. She controlled them before anyone saw. She had read Delegate Preth's proposal the night before. She had slept very badly. Preth rose from his seat on the east tier. He was large for a Vreth, wide through the shoulders, built for his homeworld's heavy gravity, with a flat face and small eyes set too close together. He carried himself like a man who had never once been surprised by a result he had prepared for. Srel Vaughn knew the type. Every council and every civilization produced them. Careful, organized, genuinely intelligent men who had mistaken the absence of surprise for the presence of wisdom. That was the most dangerous kind of person in any room. Delegates, he said. The translation systems hummed to life across the chamber, each species receiving his words in its own language with barely a breath of delay. I bring forward Proposal 7741C, Preemptive Territorial Annexation of Sol 3. He let the translation finish. The species known informally as humans have achieved weapons-grade spaceflight. Our projections indicate a threat vector emergence within 40 years. The full data packet has been submitted for review. The Vreth Dominion moves that this council authorize a coordinated annexation operation before that window closes. The time to act is now, while the advantage still belongs to us. He sat down. The chamber began to talk. Srel Vaughn's chromatophores went white. Not the white of surprise, not the white of fear, the white of a very old creature sitting very still because she had learned, a long time ago, that certain kinds of panic looked exactly like calm if you held them tightly enough inside your chest and did not let them move. She requested the floor. The session moderator denied it. Preth's proposal carried priority status, and open floor debate would not begin for another 2 hours. She sat back. She filed a formal written objection through her desk terminal. The system accepted it. A small green light confirmed the record. No one looked at her. Around the chamber, the calculations were already running. She could see it in the way delegates pulled up their data screens, heads tilting, eyes moving through the numbers Preth had submitted. The projections were sound. She had run them herself, from the same raw data, the night before. They were genuinely, carefully, professionally sound. That was the problem with sound projections. They told you what was likely based on what you knew. They said nothing about what you did not know. And with Earth, what you did not know was the entire point. A delegate from the Heth Collective raised a concern about resource allocation. Another from the Solon Trade Federation asked about the timeline for establishing orbital control post-annexation. Preth answered both questions with the smooth and patient confidence of a man who had been rehearsing for this meeting for years. He probably had been. The Vreth Dominion was 200 years into spaceflight. They had reached that particular age a civilization arrives at when it has solved enough of its own internal problems to start looking outward. The looking outward felt like ambition. It felt like strength. It felt like the natural next step. It was, in Srelvan's experience, the most dangerous feeling a young civilization could have. 17 civilizations had gone through this phase during her time on the Council. 7 of them had encountered Earth during it. None of those 7 had come out of the experience the same way they had entered it. 2 had never recovered. 1 had simply never come back from the encounter at all, and the records were incomplete in ways that still made Srelvan uncomfortable when she thought about them late at night. The vote ran for 15 minutes. When the count closed, the results sat at 61 in favor, 14 opposed. The session moderator logged it. The chamber moved on to the next item on the agenda as if nothing significant had happened. As if the most consequential decision made in this room in 200 years was simply one more line in one more session record. Srelvan sat with her hands flat on her desk, and her chromatophores cycling a gray so deep and flat, it had no clean name in conclave standard. In her own language, the nearest word translated roughly as, "the color of things you already know are coming." She did not speak to anyone during the recess. She went to the corridor outside the main chamber, a long hallway with wide viewports cut into the outer wall, looking out into nothing. Deep black. Stars that looked close and were not. She stood there and looked at them and did not think about anything in particular, because she had learned long ago that thinking about things you could not stop was a waste of the time you had left. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. Slow, heavy, the walk of something very large that had decided out of basic courtesy to pretend it was capable of moving quietly. Mreth of the Korath sovereignty. 600 years in this chamber, the only delegate older than Srelvan. He was wide and gray, and carried the specific stillness of a being that had long ago made peace with being unable to fix most things. He stopped beside her. He looked out the viewport. "I voted no," he said. "I know," she said. They stood in silence. The stars did not move. They never did from this viewport. The station was positioned to keep the galactic core centered in the frame. It had always struck Srelvan as either hopeful or vain. She had never decided which. "Have you ever spoken with a human?" Mreth asked. "Directly?" "Once," she said. "Briefly. Their year 2011. I was on observation rotation." "What were they like?" She considered it. A real question deserved a real answer. "They offered me food," she said. "I was not visible. I was fully cloaked. The observation protocols were clear. There was no equipment that could have detected the cloak. There was no logical reason." She looked directly at the tree I was standing behind, and said out loud, to no one, "You can come out if you're hungry. I made too much anyway." Mreth made a sound that did not translate. "She just knew," Srelvan said, "the way they always just know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The Dominion won't listen." "No. Will it go badly?" Her chromatophore shifted. Once. The color had no translation she was willing to give. "It will go," she said, "exactly the way it always goes." She filed objection number 2 on her handheld as she walked back toward the chamber doors. The record reflected it. The subcommittee room was small by conclave standards. It seated 20. 6 delegates showed up. 2 of them fell asleep before Srelvan finished loading her files. She had been granted 40 minutes to present her formal objection to Proposal 7741C. 40 minutes was the standard time allocated for dissenting voices on proposals that had already passed the preliminary vote. It was, she had always felt, the conclave's polite way of allowing someone to speak, while ensuring it did not have to listen. She had prepared for this for 30 years, long before Preth had tabled his proposal, long before the Vreth Dominion had even achieved orbital flight. She had watched them develop and had known, with the patient certainty of someone who had seen this pattern before, that this meeting was coming. She began. Sol 3, commonly called Earth, has been under conclave observation for 300 years, she said. In that time, 31 separate observer reports have been filed. I have cross-referenced all of them. I will present the core findings. The 4 awake delegates looked at their own data screens. One was reading something else entirely. She could see the reflection of unrelated documents in his eyes. She kept going. The humans have no unified planetary defense structure. She brought up the first data set. No single military command. No coordinated response network that spans their full population. One of the awake delegates, a young Palhari named Sauce, in only his 3rd decade on the Council, nodded with visible relief. Then they're fractured, he said. That simplifies the operational picture considerably. They have fought, Srelvan said, approximately 240 major wars in recorded history. Every one of those wars was fought between human groups, against other humans, using weapons they built themselves, on a single planet, with limited resources, and no outside pressure forcing them to develop. They did it entirely on their own initiative. She looked at him. That is not fracture. That is practice. Sauce stopped nodding. She moved to the second data set. Their dominant military organizations number in the hundreds. No two share complete command authority. They frequently operate in opposition to one another, even while fighting a common enemy. That's a structural weakness, said another delegate, this one from the Mren High Assembly. Old enough to know better, Srelvan thought, and doing it anyway. A single human military body, she said, has stood active and operational for over 240 years, without pause. It has fought across 17 major conflicts in that time. It has never once been the largest military force on the planet. It has never lost a war it chose to finish. She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. The other human military bodies are similar. Each one has a different doctrine, different equipment, different methods. They do not coordinate well with each other. She paused. They do not need to. The room was a little quieter. She moved to the third point. Earth has experienced 14 events in its recorded history that carried extinction-level potential. Catastrophic disease, resource collapse, atmospheric damage, internal conflicts that reached the threshold of planetary sterilization. She pulled up the timeline. The graph was not subtle. They survived all 14. Luck, said the delegate who had been reading something else. He was at least paying attention now. 3 times in sequence, possibly, Srelvan said. 14 times across 300,000 years of recorded behavior is not luck. It is a pattern. A species that has survived 14 extinction-level events is not fragile. It has been tested at scales most species never face, and is still here, still expanding, still building. She pulled up the weapons data. And now it has ships. The room held the particular silence of people who were starting to feel something, but had not yet decided to admit it. Sauce cleared his throat. Ambassador, he said, and he was trying to sound casual. Is there one finding, one single data point, that concerns you most? If you had to name it. Srelvan looked at him. She had been waiting for this question, not because she had planned to be asked it, but because it was the inevitable question. It was the question every subcommittee eventually asked when the data made them uncomfortable, because choosing one thing to focus on felt like a way to contain the discomfort. She closed the weapons file. She closed the military history file. She closed the survival data, and the spaceflight projections, and the resource analysis, and everything else she had spent 30 years compiling. She opened one document. It was a psychological study. Not a weapons assessment, not a strategic model, a study authored by a human academic in the 22nd century, on the subject of how humans related to the fact of their own death. The translator rendered the title in conclave standard. We know we will die, the behavioral consequences of mortal self-awareness. Every species on this council, Srelvan said, evolved with some mechanism for managing the awareness of death. Suppression, ritualization, philosophical acceptance, the biological drive to avoid thinking about it. She let the room breathe. Humans are different. They are aware of their mortality from a very early developmental stage. They think about it often. They discuss it openly. They build art and philosophy and religion specifically around it. She looked at the document. And then they get up in the morning and do things anyway. The room was fully quiet now. Even the delegate who had been reading something else. There is a line in this document, she said. It is from a human philosopher. The translation is imperfect, but it is the closest I have found to a clear statement of the operating principle. She read it. We are the species that looked at the dark and decided to go find out what was in it. No one spoke. She was old enough to know that the right silence was more convincing than the most careful argument. The Vreth Dominion, she said at last, has been a spacefaring civilization for 200 years. Humanity has been rehearsing scenarios like this one for 300,000. They have been looking up at the sky since before they had writing, since before they had metal tools. And their consistent response to the unknown has not been caution. She closed the document. It has been curiosity. And after curiosity, preparation. And after preparation, action. She picked up her files. I have submitted my full written objection. All source documents are attached. I ask that the subcommittee pause the planning process pending a full review. She thanked them for their time. She left. Behind her, the subcommittee adjourned for what it called further consideration. The planning timeline advanced by 2 weeks while the consideration was ongoing. This was standard procedure. Srelvan filed objection number 9 in the hallway. She walked back to her office, sat down at her desk, and began preparing the document she had hoped she would never need to prepare. The one she had been building piece by piece for 30 years. The one that said nothing she had not already said, but said it in a different way. The way that showed, rather than argued. The way that let the past speak for itself, because the past was the only thing, in her experience, that some people would finally listen to. She titled it, Archive of Prior Contact, Sol 3, submitted for the record. The document Srelvan submitted to the Planning Committee as Appendix 7 of her formal objection was 43 pages long. Most of it was sourcing, cross-references, observer logs with date stamps going back 3 centuries. The kind of careful, dense material that committees received and stored without reading. The part they might have read, if they had tried, was 11 pages. It was a list of entries, each one short, each one about a civilization that had made direct contact with Earth before the current era of careful, distant observation. Srelvan had spent years tracking them down, fragmentary records, incomplete logs, the kind of institutional memory that collects in corners of large archives where no one thinks to look. She had organized them by date. She had written each entry herself, from the source material, in plain language, because she believed in plain language and had very little patience left for anything else. Entry 1. The Dravathi expansion reached the outer edge of the Sol system in what Earth's people would later call the 14th century. Their scouts identified a population center in the central landmass of Earth's largest connected continent. Pre-industrial. No visible space technology. No communication signals above basic atmospheric range. The Dravathi assessed the inhabitants as a primitive species at low developmental stage, non-threatening. They moved to establish a forward staging post on the edge of the population zone. The staging post was destroyed in 96 hours. The Dravathi records from this engagement do not exist. They were not lost. They were never written. The 3 ships that established the post did not return, and the follow-up mission found only a crater, and at its edge, a small human structure that had clearly been repurposed and was now being used for grain storage. The human records from this period describe the event as a particularly bad storm, accompanied by unusual lights. No formal Dravathi after-action report was ever filed, because filing a report would have required acknowledging what had happened, and the Dravathi High Council had elected, by unanimous internal vote, not to do that. The Dravathi expansion continued in every direction except towards Sol. The Dravathi civilization ceased to exist 200 years later. Unrelated causes, almost certainly. Entry 2. The Korath sovereignty, of which current Council delegate Reth is a representative, operated an atmospheric study program for low-contact species during the period Earth's people call the late 19th century. Standard practice: deploy a cloaked observation drone, low altitude, collect atmospheric and biological samples, withdraw. Clean, non-invasive, no contact. The drone assigned to Sol 3 completed its descent without incident. It reached its survey altitude. It began collecting. A human in a rural area. The specific region has been redacted from the original log at Reth's personal request. Notice something. The cloaking system on Korath drones of this period bent light at visible frequencies with an efficiency of 99.7%. The remaining 0.3% produced a faint shimmer under direct sunlight. Barely visible. Detectable in theory only if a person knew exactly what to look for and was standing at a specific angle with clear sightlines and bright light. The human had been doing farm work. They were not looking for anything. They retrieved a firearm from their home. It was a simple device by any standard, a tube that accelerated a small metal object using controlled combustion. The drone's hull was rated for atmospheric debris, moderate particle impact, and standard weather events. It was not rated for ballistic impact delivered from directly below at close range by a creature with 200 years of accumulated experience in hunting things that tried to hide from it. The drone was destroyed. The Korath sovereignty reviewed its observation protocols the following month. Sol 3 was reclassified from observe freely to observe at distance, do not approach below 500 kilometers. That classification has been in effect ever since. Reth had never changed it. He had never explained why. Entry 3. In the period Earth's people call the early 21st century, a conclave signals monitoring station in the outer Sol system registered a brief anomaly. An unauthorized signal, low power, highly directional, aimed at the monitoring station from a point source on Earth's surface. The signal contained mathematical content, sequence patterns, prime numbers, basic geometric ratios, the standard format used across the galaxy as a first contact signal, the universal scientific equivalent of a knock on the door. The monitoring station was classified. Its location was not publicly known within the conclave. Its coordinates had never been transmitted through any channel accessible to a pre-contact species. The source of the signal on Earth's surface turned out to be a civilian. Not a government, not a military body, a private individual with self-built equipment working alone, who had apparently calculated the likely position of an observation satellite using only publicly available orbital mechanics data and years of patient skywatching. The conclave's formal response to this signal was to log it, classify it, and take no action. The private individual sent the same signal 7 more times over the following decade, each one more refined than the last. The conclave took no action on any of them. The log entry for the final signal, written by the monitoring station's own automated system, noted that the human's mathematical encoding had, by the 7th transmission, become more sophisticated than the station's original design specifications. No one flagged this for review. Entry 4. This entry is dated in the future. The Vref Dominion Preliminary Survey Team, authorized under Proposal 7741C, currently scheduled to depart within the next operational cycle. 3 ships, veteran crew, Full tactical loadout. A carefully selected low population insertion point to minimize early contact while maximizing observation data. A clean operation, well planned, with sound projections and a thorough pre-mission briefing. This entry has no further content. Srel Vaughn had written only one additional line beneath the blank space, in a font slightly smaller than the rest of the document. Space reserved. The record will be updated. The document ran to 43 pages. The 11 pages of entries were at the end. The sourcing and the cross-references and the observer logs came first, because Srel Vaughn knew that most readers gave up before the end, and she had put the dense material at the front to thin the room down to only the people who were serious. She submitted it as Appendix 7. She listed it on the cover sheet. She flagged it in her written objection as essential reading. The planning committee acknowledged receipt of the full document. They logged the appendices as received. She never received any indication that anyone had read page 32 onwards. Brett stopped by her office 2 days after the submission. He did not ask about the document directly. He stood in her doorway for a moment, and then he said, carefully, "You included the drone incident." "Yes," she said. "I asked you not to." He said, "You asked me not to name the region." She said, "I didn't name the region." His expression was the expression of a being who had made a certain kind of peace a very long time ago, and was occasionally, unexpectedly, asked to look at it again. "The blank entry," he said. "Yes. You think it will go that way?" Srel Vaughn looked at her desk, at the small green confirmation light that had lit up 31 times now, as the system accepted each of her objections, and stored them neatly in the record, where they would sit, unread, until something happened that made them relevant. "I think," she said, "that we will fill the entry." She filed objection number 32. The record reflected it. Brett went home. He sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about a drone that had not come back, and a human standing in a field who had simply looked up and noticed, and done something about it without asking anyone's permission. He thought about that a great deal in the weeks that followed. It did not make him feel better. The 3 Vreth ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sol's outer system at 0340 local station time. Clean insertion. No anomalies. The cloaking systems ran at full capacity, and the crew ran their checks, and everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Commander Ven Prahl stood at the forward console and looked at the star on the display, and felt, despite himself, the particular stillness that came before an operation that had been planned very carefully for a very long time. He had read the proposal. He had reviewed the projections. He believed in them. He had 30 years of operational experience and a record that the Dominion was proud of, and he was not a man given to doubt. He did have a memory of sitting, briefly, in a corridor during one of the council sessions while waiting for his tactical briefing, and overhearing 2 old ambassadors talking quietly near a viewport. He had not been able to make out most of it. He had caught one sentence, in a language he barely knew, that the translation system had rendered slowly and uncertainly as something like, "It will go the way it always goes." He had not thought about that sentence again until this moment. He pushed it aside. He gave the order to begin the approach. The insertion point was a rural area in the northern hemisphere. Low population density. No military installations within 400 kilometers, according to the survey data. The nearest large city was hours away by their estimates of human ground transportation. They descended slowly. The cloaking held. The atmospheric entry was smooth. They reached survey altitude without incident and began the observation sequence. 11 minutes into the observation sequence, the communications officer turned from his station. "Commander," he said, "we are being observed." Ven Prahl looked at him. "From where?" "The ground. A fixed location. Approximately 2 kilometers from our current position." "Military installation?" "No, sir." The officer paused. He looked at his screen. He looked at it again. "The source appears to be a civilian optical instrument of some kind, paired with a signal processing device. Another pause. The processing device appears to be constructed from components that are not designed for this purpose. The human built it themselves, from parts. No one on the bridge said anything for a moment. They detected us through the cloak? Then Prahl asked. They detected the gravitational footprint of the drives, sir. The cloak does not mask gravitational effect. The human apparently built a sensor sensitive enough to detect the variance. The officer checked his screen a third time. Sir, I'm reading a data transmission. From the surface, moving outward, the human is broadcasting. To a military channel? To a public network, accessible to anyone on the planet. Then Prahl looked at his navigation officer. The navigation officer looked at the ceiling. How many humans have received the broadcast? Van Prahl asked. The communications officer watched his numbers climb. Currently, he said, 14,000. It is increasing, rapidly. What followed was a sequence of events that Van Prahl would, in his debrief, describe as operationally disorienting. The full debrief report ran to 60 pages. The summary was 3 sentences. The mission encountered unexpected resistance. The resistance did not originate from any official human organization. Recommend full operational review before further engagement. The word resistance was in retrospect not quite the right word. Within 40 minutes of the first transmission, a distributed network of humans across the planet had independently verified the original observation and were sharing data with each other through their public information systems. These humans had no formal organization, no government authorization. They had simply been, for a very long time, interested in exactly this kind of event. And they had prepared for it privately, on their own time, the way humans apparently prepared for things, without waiting for permission, without funding, without any official acknowledgement that the thing they were preparing for was even real. They knew what they were looking at. This was the part that stopped the debrief room cold. They knew. The specific technical language being used on the human public networks, the discussions of atmospheric entry profiles, the correct analysis of the gravitational signature, the remarkably accurate estimates of ship size and configuration. These were not guesses. These were assessments made by humans who had been studying this subject, seriously and rigorously, as a private interest, for years. And then the ship systems went down. Not all at once, one by one, over the course of approximately 12 minutes. Navigation first, then communications, then the secondary control interface for the engine array. Not destroyed, taken. The systems were still running, they were simply no longer responding to the crew. Then Prahl had ordered every countermeasure in the tactical manual. None of them worked. Whatever had entered their systems was not behaving like any intrusion model the Dominion security architecture had been built to handle. It was moving through their systems the way water moves through cracked ground, not forcing anything open, just finding every small gap and flowing through it, patient and quiet and complete. They could not stop it. They could not trace it. They could not even fully see it while it was happening. For 22 minutes, Van Prahl stood on his own bridge and could not make his ship do anything. Then the systems came back. All of them, simultaneously, as if someone had simply decided they were done. Van Prahl ran the diagnostic before he breathed. The report came back within a minute. The navigation charts had been copied. The communication logs had been duplicated. The full technical specifications of all 3 ships, hull design, engine configuration, weapon systems, life support architecture, had been quietly and methodically read and saved to somewhere else. And in the command interface, in the space where official communications were received, sitting there with a simple text timestamp and nothing else, a 4-second audio file. It took the translation system 40 minutes to render it in conclave standard. It was a human voice, young, calm, the specific calm of someone who was not scared because they were the one who was in control. Hey, cool ship. A pause. Marcus, age 19. The 3 ships returned to Vreth space without completing any part of the mission. The debrief took 11 hours. It was attended by senior Dominion tactical staff, 2 Council observers, and Delegate Preth, who sat at the end of the table and did not speak for the first 9 hours. In the 10th hour he asked a question. "The individual who accessed our systems," he said, "what was their institutional role? Military? Government intelligence?" The tactical officer who had led the technical analysis looked at his report. He looked at it for a long moment. "No institutional role, sir. The individual appears to be a student. They intercepted a Vreth communication signal 3 years ago through a civilian radio observatory. They appear to have spent the intervening period writing penetration architecture for alien signal systems as a personal project." Preth looked at the table. "As a hobby," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." The room was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet, when everyone in them is thinking the same thought, but no one wants to be the first person to say it out loud. On the second day after the debrief, one of the 3 ship commanders submitted his resignation from the Dominion military. He gave no reason. He went home to the coast of his homeworld, and was not heard from professionally again. His neighbors later described him as a man who had become very fond of sitting outside at night and looking at the sky, though never, they noted, with any apparent pleasure. Srelvan received the debrief summary through standard council channels. She read it once. She set it down. She sat at her desk for a while without doing anything. Then she opened the document she had been preparing for 30 years, the one with 43 pages, and 11 pages of archive entries, and a blank space at the end, marked Space Reserved. She filled it in. The entry was 4 sentences long. The last sentence was, "All crew returned. No casualties. The record notes, this is not typical." She filed objection number 43. The communique arrived 6 months after the ships came back. It came through the Conclave's official diplomatic intake channel, which was the correct channel, which was the first thing that surprised everyone. It was formatted correctly, filed under the right classification codes. The language was Conclave Standard, which Earth was not officially documented as possessing. The grammar was slightly formal, in the way of something written by a person who had learned a language from documents rather than conversation. But it was correct, careful, precise in the places that mattered. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph introduced the sender as a representative of the United Earth Diplomatic Office, a body that had not, until 6 months ago, officially existed. The second paragraph stated plainly that Earth was aware of Proposal 7741C, its preliminary vote, the test incursion, and the full content of the debrief summary, which was a classified document that had been available to exactly 41 people in the Vreth Dominion. It did not explain how Earth had obtained this information. It did not say it had obtained this information exactly. It simply referred to recent events in a way that made the source self-evident. The third paragraph formally requested observer status at the Galactic Council, on the grounds that, in the communique's own phrasing, several recent events suggest our interests may benefit from direct representation. The conclave spent 2 weeks in procedural discussion about whether to accept the request. Srelvan filed no objections during this period. She had nothing to object to. The request was granted. A hearing date was set. Dr. Yael Oduya arrived at the conclave station alone. This was itself notable. Every other species that had ever been granted first observer status had sent a delegation. Advisors, security personnel, technical staff. The act of entering the conclave for the first time was for most species a formal event, a moment. Dr. Oduya came off the transit vessel carrying a bag and a thermos. She was shorter than most of the beings in the docking corridor. She moved through the space with the particular energy of someone who had been in difficult rooms before, and had long since stopped finding the difficulty interesting. She looked at things directly. She did not look uncertain. She was brought to a preparation room before the session. A conclave aide offered her a selection of refreshments. She declined politely and poured from her thermos instead. The aide watched her do it. Something about the motion, the ease of it, the comfort, The complete absence of any awareness that this moment was supposed to be significant held the aide in place for a moment longer than necessary. She drank. She refilled. She reviewed her documents. The council chamber for observer status hearings was smaller than the main session hall, but built along the same principles. Wide, high, cold light from no clear source. 60 delegates present, which was more than the standard attendance for a hearing of this kind. Word had gotten around. Srel Vaughn sat in her seat and watched Dr. Oduya enter the chamber. The human walked to the observer position at the center of the floor, set her bag down, placed her thermos on the small desk provided, and looked around the room with the calm expression of a person taking a reasonable inventory of a new environment. She poured from the thermos. Every alien eye in the chamber went to the thermos. It was not remarkable. It was a simple metal container. It held a hot liquid the human appeared to enjoy. There was nothing extraordinary about it. And yet, something about it. The repetition, the ritual of it. A creature who had traveled to the other side of the galaxy, and on arrival, in a room full of beings who had been debating whether to annex her planet, her first act was to make herself comfortable. It was, in a way that nobody in the room could quite name, the most alarming thing they had seen all week. Delegate Preth began. His political position had contracted significantly since the debrief. He spoke carefully. He framed the test incursion as a misunderstanding, a routine survey. He was sorry for any alarm it had caused. The Vreth Dominion had the greatest respect for Earth's development as a civilization. Proposal 7741C was, he suggested, perhaps better understood in context. Dr. Oduya listened to all of this. "That's fair," she said. She reached into her bag. She produced a single document, physical paper, which was unusual. She slid it across the desk toward the center of the floor where the session moderator could retrieve it. "I've brought a reference document," she said, "for the record." The moderator distributed copies. The delegates opened them. It was a list, 41 pages. Srel Vaughn recognized the first section immediately. It was her own archive document, Appendix 7, cross-referenced and reformatted. But the second half was something else entirely. Earth's own internal records, 3 centuries of documentation. Observations of the Conclave's observation programs. Files on every survey drone, every cloaked observer, every monitoring station in the outer Sol system. Carefully sourced, precisely dated. Earth had known. Not suspected, not guessed, known. The monitoring station signals, the observer rotations, the cloaked survey drones, the Dravathi staging post, all of it. 300 years of detailed human record-keeping about a galactic community that had been carefully pretending it did not exist. And Earth had not done anything about it. It had waited. It had watched back. It had prepared, quietly and thoroughly, in the patient way Srel Vaughn had described in the subcommittee room when no one was really listening. And it had waited for the moment when having this conversation would be on its own terms. The chamber was very still. Preth's chromatophores, he did not have chromatophores, but if he had, would have been a very difficult color. "Dr. Oduya," he said, and his voice had found a new register, something careful and thin. "How would Earth like to proceed?" She considered the question. The sound of the pour was very clear in the silence. "We'd like a seat," she said. "We've been standing in the hallway a long time." After the session, Mreth found Srel Vaughn in the corridor by the viewports. The same corridor, the same stars, the same cold light that wasn't quite light. "She brought a thermos," he said. "Yes," Srel Vaughn said. The whole room was watching it. Oduya was shaking hands with 12 different species, asking them questions about themselves, and refilling her thermos a 4th time. 3 delegates had already tried to determine what the liquid was and why she needed it. She had answered all 3 questions pleasantly and without any particular concern for whether the answers made sense. She was, in every way that mattered, completely at home. Srel Vaughn went back to her office. She opened her filing system. She found the list of objections, 44 in total, filed over 30 years, each one accepted by the system and stored in the record, and read by no one. She selected all 44. She filed a single document, formal withdrawal of objections 1 through 44. Resolution achieved through direct diplomatic representation. Further objection no longer necessary. The record reflects it. The small green light on her desk turned on. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned it off and went home and slept better than she had in 30 years.